In episode 54, Ensure Secure Installation and Deployment Procedures Consistently, we focus on the moment where all the planning, coding, and testing work becomes real for operations teams.
Installations and first deployments are often done under time pressure, with people eager to make a deadline or restore service, which is exactly when risky shortcuts creep in. The goal here is to standardize those handoffs so that every install follows a predictable pattern that embeds security from the first command, not as an afterthought. When installation and deployment procedures are consistent, documented, and rehearsed, they reduce both operational surprises and audit findings. For an exam candidate, this discipline sits right at the intersection of secure engineering and day-to-day operations. A practical foundation is strong pre-flight checklists that cover everything required before anyone starts typing commands or clicking installers. These checklists should include prerequisites such as operating system versions, required patches, installed dependencies, and available disk and memory resources. They also define which credentials are needed, which accounts should not be used, and how connectivity to required services such as databases, message queues, and external payment gateways will be validated. Running through the checklist forces teams to surface missing pieces early instead of discovering them halfway through an install. Over time, these pre-flight steps become a shared habit that reduces both failed deployments and insecure improvised fixes. Before any installation proceeds, the origin and integrity of packages must be verified as a standard, non-negotiable step. That means checking digital signatures, verifying checksums against trusted sources, and confirming provenance records that show where the software was built and by which pipeline. This applies equally to commercial products, open-source components, and internal services, because any of them can be tampered with in transit or mispackaged accidentally. When teams normalize this verification step, they reduce the chance of quietly introducing malicious or corrupted binaries into sensitive environments. It also becomes much easier to satisfy auditors and customers who ask how you know that what you installed is actually what you intended to install. Service accounts and execution identities play a key role in how installed software behaves after go-live, which is why least privilege should be enforced from the first deployment. Using non-privileged service accounts as the default, rather than relying on generic administrative identities or shared root access, limits what a compromised process can do. Installation procedures should spell out exactly how these accounts are created, which groups or roles they belong to, and what file system or network access they receive. Avoiding broad, persistent privileges reduces the blast radius of both configuration errors and successful attacks. When least privilege is built into installation, later hardening steps become simpler and less disruptive. Hardened configurations should be applied during installation itself, not delayed until some future hardening phase that rarely arrives. That means enabling secure protocols, setting strong logging defaults, configuring sensible session and authentication rules, and disabling insecure options before the service ever handles real data. Installation scripts and procedures should embed these configurations as the standard baseline rather than leaving them as optional follow-up steps. When hardening is built into the initial setup, every new instance starts from a known secure posture instead of a vendor-friendly demo mode. This approach also reduces the operational friction of trying to retrofit security settings onto running systems. Many products arrive with sample content, diagnostics endpoints, and default administrative interfaces that are useful for evaluation but dangerous in real environments. Secure installation procedures require that these elements be disabled, removed, or strongly locked down immediately after the initial setup, preferably as part of automated post-install steps. That includes demo users, test databases,
example applications, and verbose debug consoles that expose internal state or configuration. Leaving these artifacts in place creates unnecessary attack paths, often with well-publicized default credentials or predictable URLs. By treating the removal or securing of these components as a completion criterion for installation, you prevent them from quietly persisting for years. Modern operations depend on observability from the first moment a service starts, so registration with monitoring and logging must be included in the installation procedure. That means configuring health checks, metrics endpoints, and structured logging destinations as part of the initial setup, not as later enhancements. When a service comes online, operations teams should immediately see its status in dashboards, receive alerts if it fails to start correctly, and have access to logs that capture both functional and security-relevant events. This early observability helps validate that the install succeeded and provides needed visibility if issues appear during the first hours or days. It also creates evidence that can be used during assessments to show that monitoring is consistently applied. File system protection is another core element of secure installation that deserves explicit steps. Procedures should define where binaries, configuration files, logs, and data directories live, and they should set ownership and permissions in a way that reflects least privilege principles. Binaries should be owned by administrative or deployment identities, while runtime processes use separate, more constrained accounts. Sensitive data, such as secrets and personal information, should never share locations with executable files, and temporary directories should be controlled to prevent misuse. When these patterns are consistently applied, they reduce opportunities for attackers to plant malicious files or tamper with application code at rest. Network exposure decisions made during installation can either constrain or greatly expand the attack surface. Deployment procedures should specify which network interfaces services may listen on, which ports are used, and which origins are allowed to connect, with a bias toward minimal exposure. Outbound egress destinations should be restricted to the specific endpoints truly required for operation, such as payment gateways, upstream application programming interfaces, or monitoring services. Installing with these constraints from the outset prevents services from accidentally becoming general-purpose proxies or pivot points within your network. Thoughtful network configuration at installation time also makes later firewall and segmentation policies easier to design and maintain. No installation story is complete without a credible, tested rollback path, and that path should be scripted rather than improvised. Scripts, or defined procedures, should support uninstallation while preserving necessary data, such as configuration backups or transaction logs, and should handle safe downgrades to prior versions where appropriate. Rehearsing these rollbacks in controlled environments helps reveal dependencies, missing steps, or incompatible changes before real incidents force a rollback under pressure. When teams know that they can step back safely, they are more willing to enforce strong standards during installation instead of tolerating questionable shortcuts. It also reassures leadership that deployments do not represent irreversible leaps into the unknown. Traceability is crucial in regulated environments, so installation procedures must include steps to record key artifacts and contextual details. That includes capturing which installer or package version was used, who performed or approved the operation, when and where it occurred, and what environment characteristics were present at the time. These details might be stored in change management systems, deployment logs, or configuration management databases, but they need to be findable and complete. When incidents or assessments arise, this record allows you to reconstruct the installation history of a system, understand which procedures were followed, and identify any deviations. It also helps with coordinated upgrades and retirements later. Finally, No installation should be considered complete until its outcomes have been validated through targeted checks. Smoke tests confirm that core functions behave as expected, such as basic user flows, connectivity to critical dependencies, and simple transaction paths. Security checks verify that expected protections, such as authentication requirements, encryption settings, and logging, are in place and behaving correctly. Operational readiness confirms that monitoring, backups, and maintenance hooks are active and usable. These validation steps provide confidence that the service is not only technically running, but also ready to handle real workload and scrutiny. A short mental review of these practices shows how they fit together into a coherent installation discipline. Checklists and provenance checks keep inputs and prerequisites under control, while least privilege, hardening, and removal of default content shape a secure initial state. Observability, file system and network protections, and rehearsed rollbacks make the service both visible and manageable under stress. Traceability records tie installations to people, times, and configurations, and outcome validation ensures that nothing is declared done until it is genuinely ready. Together, these elements turn installation from a one-time scramble into a repeatable, auditable process. The practical conclusion for episode 54 is to take one installer flow you rely on and embed explicit security checks into it. That might be the installation of a payment application, a supporting database, or a key internal service. But the idea is to move from assumptions to documented, enforced steps. Adding verification of signatures, enforcing non-privileged accounts, wiring in observability, and capturing traceability data for that single flow provides a concrete demonstration of improvement. Once the pattern exists and teams see that it makes life easier rather than harder, it can be extended to other installations. For an exam candidate, leading this kind of standardization is a clear sign of operational maturity. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.